Maduro's extradition to New York leaves Caracas in financial limbo. Banking sector braces for transition chaos as Delcy Rodriguez clings to power. The pre-dawn extraction of Nicolás Maduro on the 3rd of January 2026 by U.S. forces under Operation Absolute Resolve has plunged Venezuela's already necrotic banking system into a state of paralyzed uncertainty. While the Trump administration has framed the operation as a decisive law enforcement action against narco-terrorism, the immediate reality on the ground in Caracas is a power vacuum that has frozen what little financial activity remained. With Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, now awaiting trial in the Southern District of New York, the acting government of Delcy Rodriguez has ordered a lockdown of state assets. For the average Venezuelan, the banking system has effectively ceased to exist as a utility. Electronic transfers are spotting, physical cash is non-existent, and the bolivar has entered a new spiral of irrelevance. The legacy collapse that defined the last decade has now met a regime shock, creating a perfect storm where no clear monetary authority exists to guide the country through the coming weeks. To understand the current paralysis, one must look at the legacy collapse that rendered Venezuelan banks hollow shells long before U.S. boots hit the ground in Caracas. Between 2017 and 2024, the banking sector was stripped of its primary function, financial intermediation. The hyperinflation of the late 2010s, which saw prices double every few weeks, decimated the capital base of both private and state-owned banks. By 2025, the total loan portfolio of the entire Venezuelan banking system was smaller than that of a single mid-sized bank in the Dominican Republic. Regulatory measures imposed by the Maduro regime, specifically the draconian legal reserve requirements, and case legal, forced banks to keep nearly all their liquidity frozen at the central bank to curb inflation. This policy effectively illegalized lending. As a result, for the last 5 years, Venezuelan banks have not been banks. They have been mere digital payment processors, earning meager fees on debit card swipes while offering zero credit to businesses or families. The system was already broken. Operation Absolute Resolve merely shattered the facade that it was still functioning. In the 9 days since the raid, a severe liquidity trap has emerged. Reports from the Venezuelan Banking Association indicate that the Central Bank of Venezuela, BCV, now operating under the tenuous command of loyalist Delcy Rodriguez, has effectively stopped injecting liquidity into the interbank system. There is a palpable fear among bank executives that any movement of funds will trigger secondary U.S. sanctions or asset seizures by the encroaching transition authorities. Consequently, the digital payment systems, Pato Mvil, that Venezuelans rely on for daily survival are experiencing record failure rates. The system breakdown mentioned in early situation reports is not just technical, it is existential. Bank managers are reportedly destroying physical records and wiping servers in anticipation of a potential regime change or U.S. audit, leaving account holders with no proof of their deposits. The hollowing out is now literal, as the institutional memory of the financial sector is being erased to protect the guilty. Ironically, the U.S. intervention has temporarily paralyzed the very mechanism that was keeping the Venezuelan economy on life support, unofficial dollarization. Since 2019, the U.S. dollar has been the de facto currency of Venezuela, used for everything from street food to real estate. However, the physical cash supply of dollars in Venezuela relies on a murky network of couriers, private jets, and money launderers, the very gray market logistics targeting by the U.S. naval blockade and the recent Department of Justice indictments. With the capture of Maduro and the tightening of the U.S. naval cordon in the Caribbean, the flow of physical cash into the country has stopped. The result is a scarcity of physical bills, especially small denominations, that has brought commerce to a halt. Merchants, unsure if the U.S. will invalidate certain dollar holdings linked to the regime, or if the Rodriguez interim will attempt a desperate confiscation of foreign currency, are refusing to trade. The economy is currently trapped between a worthless bolivar and an inaccessible dollar. The geopolitical narrative dominating Washington this week is selective rollback, a strategy outlined by the U.S. Department of Energy on January 7, 2026. The Trump administration has signaled a willingness to allow Venezuelan oil to reach global markets to stabilize prices, seizing to tankers and redirecting them to U.S. refineries. However, this does not translate to relief for the banking sector. The U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFSC, has maintained a strict prohibition on financial dealings with the Central Bank of Venezuela, BCV, and the state-owned Banco de Venezuela. This creates a schizophrenic economic reality. Oil may soon flow north, but the revenue will not flow south, at least not into the hands of the Rodriguez administration. Instead, revenue is expected to be diverted into escrow accounts, controlled by the U.S. Federal Reserve, or a yet-to-be-named transitional council. For the local banking system, this means the petrostate model remains dead. There will be no influx of petrodollars to recapitalize the banks, leaving them insolvent and dependent on a government that has lost its head. The private banking sector, led by institutions like Banesco, Mercantil, and BBVA Provincial, is currently navigating a minefield. For years, the banks survived by practicing compliance overkill, refusing to touch any funds remotely linked to sanctioned individuals, SDNs, to avoid U.S. wrath. Now the situation is infinitely more complex. The Rodriguez regime, desperate for cash to pay the military and maintain loyalty, is reportedly pressuring private banks to liquidate their meager foreign currency reserves and hand them over to the state. Conversely, U.S. blooders, State Department officials have issued back-channel warnings that any bank assisting the illegitimate holdover regime of Delcy Rodriguez will face immediate liquidation and asset forfeiture in the United States. Private bank executives are essentially paralyzed,
opting to shut down branches and limit online operations to maintenance mode to avoid taking orders from either side. This operational freeze has made it impossible for average citizens to access savings or process payrolls, further fueling civil unrest. With the formal banking system broken and physical dollars scarce, Venezuelans are accelerating their migration to cryptocurrency, specifically the stablecoin Tether, USDT. Binance and other peer-to-peer, P2P, exchanges have seen transaction volumes spike by 400% since the January 3rd raid. In the absence of a functioning banking wire system, USDT has become the only way to move value across borders or preserve wealth. However, this lifeline is also fraying. The U.S. Department of Justice's indictment of Maduro included charges related to the use of cryptocurrency for money laundering, leading to fears that the U.S. might sanction specific wallet addresses or pressure exchanges to freeze Venezuelan accounts indiscriminately. The digital bridge that many Venezuelans rely on is shaking, creating a sense of panic among the tech-savvy middle class who see their last financial refuge potentially coming under U.S. regulatory crosshairs. The political survival of the acting Rodriguez government hinges on one metric: ability to pay the military top brass and the security forces, Guardia Nacional. Historically, this was done through off-the-books gold sales and direct dollar cash payments. With Maduro gone, the logistical networks for gold smuggling disrupted by U.S. surveillance assets, the state's coffers are empty. The banking system cannot print money that buys loyalty anymore. Financial analysts predicted that by the end of January 2026, the regime will face a fiscal cliff where it literally cannot feed or pay its enforcers. This suggests that the current broken state of the banking system is a precursor to a total state collapse. Without a functioning treasury or a banking sector capable of monetizing debt, the acting government is running on inertia. The moment the payrolls bounce, likely in the next pay cycle, the chain of command is expected to fracture, potentially leading to the final dissolution of the Shrift state apparatus. Before January 2026, a few courageous or reckless international banks maintained correspondent relationships with Venezuelan private banks, mostly via intermediaries in Panama, Puerto Rico, or Turkey. Operation Absolute Resolve has severed these last remaining threads. Risk compliance officers at major global financial institutions have issued blanket no-go orders for Venezuela, fearing that any transaction could be retroactively linked to the Maduro indictment or the ongoing U.S. military operation. As of January 12, Venezuela is arguably the most financially isolated nation on Earth, surpassing even North Korea and Iran in terms of banking disconnection. Transfers for humanitarian aid, remittances from the diaspora, and payments for essential medicine imports are bouncing back to senders. The swiftness of this de-risking has left NGOs and international aid organizations unable to fund their operations in country, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis that the UN warned about on January. Looking beyond the immediate volatility, the current reality, 2026, suggests that rebuilding Venezuela's banking system will be a Herculean task, far more difficult than the political transition itself. The system is not just paused, it is structurally obsolete. Technology platforms are outdated, the capital base is eroded, and the talent pool of bankers has largely emigrated to Miami, Madrid, or Bogotá. A reconstruction plan would require 1. The abolition of the bolivar and the formal adoption of the U.S. dollar or new gold-backed currency. 2. An infusion of at least $50 billion in liquidity from the IMF and World Bank to recapitalize the central bank. And 3. A forensic audit of all accounts to separate legitimate savings from illicit regime assets. Even with a selective rollback of sanctions, U.S. investors are unlikely to touch the Venezuelan banking sector for years. The legal risks involving outstanding arbitration awards and defaulted bonds, now totaling over $170 billion, mean that Venezuela is legally bankrupt in every sense of the word. As of January 12, 2026, the Venezuelan banking system is a zombie entity, dead, yet still shuffling forward due to sheer necessity of the population. The bad things that have happened are not just the raid or the arrests, but the final confirmation that the country's financial sovereignty is gone. The big deals being made are happening in backrooms in Washington and New York, involving the fate of Venezuela's oil and debt, while the banks in Caracas remain shuttered or empty. The losses incurred are borne by the Venezuelan people, whose savings have evaporated and whose economic future is now entirely dependent on foreign intervention. The detention of Nicolas Maduro has decapitated the regime, but it has not yet cured the patient. Until a recognized transitional government is seated and sanctions are formally lifted, not just rolled back, the banking system will remain broken, a monument to 20 years of economic mismanagement and the final violent shock of 2026.